Hey everybody, welcome back to the Sanctum. As you can see by this magnificent display before us, we're going to be taking a look at one of the greatest monsters of all time, and one of my favorites, the Frankenstein monster. Or, as I prefer to call him, Frankenstein. Now, when I was going through my collection trying to figure out things to shoot for this year's Bleak Sunday episode, I said I need something really Halloween-y, something that really represents Halloween. And what represents Halloween more than Frankenstein? And I found that I had several Frankenstein costumes. And I thought it might be interesting to take a look at the various iterations of the Frankenstein costume and what it looked like and how it evolved throughout the years, from the early days of the monster craze right up into the 80s. But to me, Frankenstein is the patron saint of Halloween costumes and the patron saint of monster kids everywhere. There is no more iconic image than the Frankenstein monster. So fire up those electrodes and join me as we peruse the graveyard of Halloween's past in a little episode I like to call The Frankenstein Files. Now, it is a well-known fact amongst monster fans that the golden age of Universal Monsters ended with Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein in 1948. So in the early to mid-50s, the movie stepped away from the gothic realm of Dracula, Frankenstein, and the Wolfman, and they entered the world of giant bugs, atomic monsters, and bug-eyed invaders from outer space. Then in 1957, something occurred to bring these characters back into America's consciousness. The first shock theater package hit syndication. Now, in this shock theater package were most of the old, solid standby Universal monster picks. Frankenstein, Son of Frankenstein, Dracula, the Wolfman. And these movies took off like gangbusters. People loved them, especially kids. It was so successful that Universal soon after released the Son of Shock syndication package. Now, even though these movies proved extremely popular with kids at the time, there wasn't a big merchandising push in the late 1950s. Yeah, famous monsters came out to feed off this Monster Kid frenzy, but the first real big piece of Monster Kid merchandise doesn't show up until 1961. And that would be the Aurora Frankenstein model kit. Now, when Aurora first went after the license for the Frankenstein monster in 1961, they weren't so sure it was going to be a hit. As a matter of fact, many people in the company had their doubts. But lucky for them, it was. It sold like crazy. Kids couldn't get enough of it. It was selling out everywhere. Stores kept calling them and asking for more. And this led to Aurora seeking the license for the other Universal monsters. Dracula, the Mummy, the Wolfman, and those did equally as well. So in essence, it is Frankenstein himself that got the ball rolling on the monster merchandise craze. Now, the three big costume companies back at that time were Ben Cooper, Collegeville, and Halco. Out of the three, Ben Cooper is probably the most well-known. Whenever vintage boxed costumes are discussed, their name inevitably comes up. But Collegeville and Halco were just as big back then. And as a matter of fact, Collegeville and Halco were making costumes prior to Ben Cooper. And they were also making costumes of licensed properties prior to Ben Cooper. Now, at that time, the licensed properties that were being turned into Halloween costumes were more cartoon characters. Bugs Bunny, Popeye, Mickey Mouse, or characters from TV. And the monster territory was traditionally populated by skeletons, devils, witches, and ghosts. So knowing that these three companies kept their eyes on what was popular at the time and what they could license to be successful Halloween costumes, it is inevitable that a Frankenstein Halloween costume would appear. And regardless of which company held the official license to making the Universal Monsters characters, each company made their own version of Frankenstein, regardless of whether they had the rights to or not. This is by no means a definitive timeline. I compiled the best timeline I could with the resources I had. I looked through old monster magazines and books, scanned over old message boards, and pored over what catalogs I could find from the big three companies. And I had many a late-night chat with friends bouncing theories and ideas around. So it was fun to put together, but it is by no means a definitive history. Consider it merely a guideline. I know what I know, and I don't claim to know much. And of course, if you have any further information or would like to add to the information, by all means reach out to me or add it to the comments section below. Now, the first record for a Frankenstein-style costume that I was able to find is this ad for Halco costumes from 1953. And it's for this Eerie Eyes costume line that they are advertising. And in that, they have a character called the Monster. And he is clearly fashioned after the Frankenstein monster. You can see the mask is even green. He's got sort of a flattish head. It looks like he's got the clamps on the forehead there. And he's got something that appears to be bolts. Now, even on the smock, the character appears to be a Frankenstein-style monster, and they do the smock in a green style. And what's interesting is the very next year in the Ben Cooper catalog, in 1954, Cooper has a similar character referred to as the Monster. And if we take a look at him here, he certainly does appear to be a Frankenstein-style monster. He's got a flat head and a bolt in the middle of his forehead. And when you look at the design on the costume or the illustration on the costume, they are clearly trying to emulate the Frankenstein monster. You've got him with his arms out in front of him. He's wearing a sports-style jacket and the boots. And you've got these cartoonish, terrified villagers or just victims down below. And what's also interesting is that the Ben Cooper version of their monster at that time in 54 is also touted to have a light up feature. In the center of his forehead, there's a light bulb that is supposed to light up. So again, I don't know if they were copying Halco or not. And quite often, these companies would try to emulate each other's bestsellers. Now, what's interesting is that this is 1954, so it's prior to that shock theater package. It's prior to the whole monster craze in general. But now we are going to jump ahead to that magical year of 1961 when the monster merchandise craze was going full steam. And we will see our first fully licensed Frankenstein costume. Now, Halco appears to be the first costume company to obtain the Universal Pictures license back in 1961. And with that license, they made this Frankenstein costume here, along with a Wolfman and a Phantom of the Opera. They also allegedly made a Dracula costume, but that's not known for sure as many collectors have never seen it. But this is a fantastic Frankenstein costume. And what a piece to kick off the Frankenstein timeline. Now, this is a really fantastic piece and possibly one of my all-time favorite pieces of Frankenstein memorabilia. I love the interpretation of the Frankenstein monster they have on the green smock there. Now, they did do two versions of the Frankenstein monster. They did one like this with the all-green smock and the pink glitter outline. And they did another one with a yellow smock and a different illustration of the Frankenstein monster. And what's interesting is the interpretation of the Frankenstein monster that they've got here. So right off the bat, we are in classic monster territory here. I mean, we've got this beautiful all-green smock with this incredible interpretation of the Frankenstein monster on it, or, as I prefer to call him, Frankenstein. And we've got what is quite possibly one of the all-time greatest Frankenstein vacuform masks. This mask is amazing. Check out the level of detail and the paint scheme that they put on this. I mean, Halco went all out on this mask. This is fantastic. It's got this sort of neonish type paint on it. Has a very funhouse feel to it to me. It's got the neck bolts. We've got these wrinkles around the mouth. We've got the ruby red lips. These blue highlights in the hair here. And it's very reminiscent of the Universal Pictures Frankenstein. Kind of Glenn Strangey, but we've got the brow there and the details around the brow. And, of course, we've got this blood along the lips. And what amazes me about a lot of this early 60s monster toys and monster merchandise is how gory a lot of it was. Perhaps it was in response to the fact that horror comics had been banned in the 50s and kids had to get their gore somewhere. And that's what's kind of cool about this one, is it has a kind of comic book quality to it. Probably because of all the primary colors involved on the paint. You've got these sort of blue highlights in the hair here for some reason, as well as this blue starburst effect on the top of the flat head. I don't know what that's supposed to be, but it's very reminiscent of a comic book. Really great thing. And then you've got this rubber band here. In the old costumes, they didn't use a rubber band. It was more like this piece of string or yarn. And we've also got this fantastic looking smock here. All green, all rayon, with this amazing illustration of the Frankenstein monster on it. Now, initially when I took a look at this, I thought that that belt was the belt for the Frankenstein costume. That we had a situation where the Frankenstein monster was appearing on the outfit that the Frankenstein monster would wear. But now, looking at it more closely, it appears to be these straps that are holding the Frankenstein monster down to the laboratory table. And that would tie in with what we're seeing here in the illustration. The bolts of electricity coming out of the neck bolts, the starbursts behind him, and the little spinning twisters. Clearly, we're looking at an illustration of the monster in the lab. Now, to me, the Frankenstein portrayed on this smock here clearly seems to be the Lon Chaney Jr. version of the monster from The Ghost of Frankenstein. Keep in mind that in the early days, these companies weren't provided with style guides. They quite often had to rely only on pictures that the studio would send them or that they could find, which is why you see a lot of variety in early monster movie merchandise. You see different interpretations of the monster. The one most often used, obviously, is the Glenn Strange version. But it's interesting to see the Lon Chaney version show up here on this early piece of monster merchandise. And I did want to point out that UPC symbol there under the Frankenstein strap. That stands for Universal Pictures Corporation, indicating that this is an officially licensed Universal Pictures product. And here's the mask and costume together, as a kid might look back in 1961 wearing it walking down the street on a cool Halloween Eve. To me, this is an amazing and fantastic piece of Monster Kid history, the first officially licensed Frankenstein costume. Now, before we move on to the next Frankenstein on the list, I did want to showcase this cool Phantom of the Opera mask from Halco. You can see it's got some of that similar neon paint to it. And the paint on these is very cool. I believe the Aurora kits back in the 60s had a paint set like this. Well, it was like monster colors. And it was kind of brighter, neon-y, funhouse monster colors. And these look great under a UV light. They're really cool looking. And of course, the Phantom of the Opera they were going here for was the Lon Chaney Sr. Phantom of the Opera. But as was the case, like I said, with the Frankenstein, they actually seem to have done the James Cagney Phantom of the Opera from The Man of a Thousand Faces, which technically is the Lon Chaney Sr. Phantom, as James Cagney was playing him in that film. And you see that James Cagney Phantom show up on quite a bit of monster merchandise in the 60s. He's actually on the Aurora model kit, and he shows up in the Monster Old Maid game. But a fantastic mask and a cool addition to my small collection of Halco Universal monsters. Now, Ben Cooper has a Frankenstein-style monster of its own in 1961 as well, called Monstro. And Monstro will appear throughout the Ben Cooper line well into the 70s. And he's this odd-looking fellow with this sort of bowl-cut haircut, but they're clearly trying to do a Frankenstein-style monster. Now, apparently Halco did not hold on to the Universal license for long, because in 1963, Ben Cooper comes out with the Big Four: Frankenstein, the Wolfman, Dracula, and the Mummy. Now, I was unable to find the 63 catalog, but I did find what appears to be an ad from 1963 advertising the Wolfman, Frankenstein, and Dracula. And the initial run of the monsters was released in what they call the pumpkin box. This is the pumpkin box here. This one is a little worse for wear, but I am just happy to have an original release pumpkin box Frankenstein in my collection. Now, the difficulty with collecting these, and you'll see when I show you the smock here, is determining what year the costume inside the box was made. as they often reused, repurposed the smocks and the masks, and they had different designs for Frankenstein off and on throughout the years on the smocks, and they had different paint jobs on the masks as well. But this is the very first Ben Cooper officially licensed Frankenstein. As you can see, the cellophane is hanging on, but it's blown out. And the box is a little worse for wear. It must have been kept in someone's garage. It's got foxing or kind of mold on it. It doesn't smell. It's not wet and it's not brittle, but over the years it got moldy and dusty. And you've got that great Ben Cooper trademark there. And I love the font. Masquerade costume with ventilated mask. Yeah, if you wore these, you know how well they're ventilated. And we've got Ben Cooper. Costumes put safety first. Costumes are flame retardant, in addition to meeting U.S. flammability laws. Masks are made of flame-proof virgin vinyl, sanitary and washable. Masks are well ventilated with extra-large eye holes. Color bright for day or night. That was a big thing with the costumes back then. They did, Ben Cooper supposedly started the glitter glow, where they put glitter on the costumes so that it would reflect off the lights of oncoming cars. Now I love it here that Frankenstein is peering out of the top of this jack-o'-lantern or the porthole of the costume box. That was what was always so cool when you'd pull these boxes off the shelf. They'd often be like this, and you'd see Frankenstein, and you'd pull it out, and then you'd be like, oh my God. And you just open that box in the store to see what the costume looked like inside. Thing with collecting these is they even repurposed and reused some of the boxes over the years. So this was advertised as an original 63, and that's what I'm assuming it is. This is the mask that appears. I don't have the 63 catalog, but that appeared in the 64 catalog and in the 63 ad. And they use this mask throughout for the costume. It's sort of, a friend and I refer to it as the shovel-faced Frankenstein. It looks like someone smashed Frankenstein in the face with a shovel. He's got a white head and a yellow face. And he's got this grotesque scar that looks like they glued it onto his head there. He's got the brow, just like the Halco one had. And again, they did the same thing over here on the side. They put the blue highlights on the sideburns here. No starburst on the top of his head. This mask is a little bent. I haven't tried to repurpose it or reform it yet. And it does have a string, but that's a string that I put on it. It didn't come with a string. And it could use a little cleaning there. But I like, again, you've got that neon-y paint. And it's a kind of cool-looking Frankenstein. It does look like the monster. It's kind of eerie. He seems more spectral because of the white in this. And I imagine that it's the bright colors in the white so that the person could be seen at night. That's why they say the color bright colors. But this mask would be the mask that was utilized quite a bit for the Frankenstein costume. There's another Ben Cooper Frankenstein mask we'll see a little bit later. But you've got this really fantastic illustration of Frankenstein there. And the glitter and the colors on this are still amazing. This really looks nice. A lot of these costumes get the brown stains on them. That's from the flame retardant chemicals they would spray on the costumes. And over the years, that is what causes the brown staining on the costume. But you've got that great Frankenstein font written on a broken board. So is Frankenstein adrift at sea hanging onto a board? Or does he walk around with this board, to show everybody his name? I don't know what it is, but it's cool. And off to the right there, you can see under Frankenstein's hand, the UP Company trademark, indicating that this is a Universal Pictures licensed product. And what's fantastic about this is the original artwork. And that's what I love when I come across these old costumes. It's great to see some of the studio artwork, but I love to see the interpretations of what these different artists did. It's well known that Frank Romano was one of the big artists for Ben Cooper, and he created a lot of the designs on the Ben Cooper smocks. The rest of these guys from some of these other companies, or that may have even worked for Ben Cooper, are unknown. They were just guys sitting at the office designing these costumes. This costume was huge for Ben Cooper, And in the 64 catalog, you see that Frankenstein mask dominating over all the other masks. He is front and center. He is on the cover of the catalog. It is Ben Cooper telling retailers, you better buy Frankenstein because he sells big. And when I was doing my research, I found out that Ben Cooper, back in the 60s, around this time period, used to have these things air on TV called hour-long Halloween parties. And I wish I could find some old tape or video of those, because those would be really cool to see. If anybody's got anything like that out there or knows links on YouTube where you can find that stuff, let me know, because I'd love to see that stuff. I really wish I had room to frame a lot of these and hang them on my wall, because they really, truly are works of art. I mean, I'm just staring at Frankenstein. I've been sitting here staring at it while I've been filming this episode, and I'm just amazed at how they put that onto a kid's costume. It is fantastic. They just don't design things graphically nowadays the way they used to back in the 50s and 60s and 70s. This is amazing. And we need our standard shot of the mask and costume together. Fantastic. Yeah, no kids getting hit by a car in that. The stuff is shining off this. But you can't believe how well the glitter looks in this. And that's what makes me think, I'm sometimes wondering, and if anybody knows, did the original Frankenstein smock have glitter on it? Because the Dracula one does not. And I'm wondering if this is possibly a glitter glow smock that got mixed in with a pumpkin box and a Frankenstein mask. Now, this next costume comes to us from a company called Bland Charnas. And I'm not exactly quite sure where it falls into the timeline, but based on the style of the costume and the graphics on the box, I'm placing it right around the mid-60s period. So we'll slide it in here right after our 63 Ben Cooper Frankenstein. Probably one of the coolest feelings you can have in collecting is stumbling across something you never knew existed. And being a huge Frankenstein fan and stumbling across this, I was amazed when I saw it, for all sorts of obvious reasons. I mean, first of all, let's just talk about this box. It's a deluxe style box, and check out the graphics on the front there. This is classic 60s style artwork on there. I mean, they just don't put graphics like that on things anymore. You've got Frankenstein, you've got Satan, you've got John Wayne Gacy up there on a pogo stick, and then you've got a queen or a fairy princess down there below. Really, really great illustrative work on the front there. And the box still has its cellophane. It's got this little diamond in the bottom that says with glow-in-the-dark mask. And it's got the sticker on the front saying costume glows in the dark. And of course, you've got that great Halloween costume font up there. Now, Bland Charnas was another costume company at the time. And obviously, they were trying to get in on this monster kid craze as well. And this is apparently a knockoff version of Frankenstein, because it is not referred to as Frankenstein, and I don't believe it was officially licensed. On the side of the box, we've got our devil there with his pitchfork, and we've got Frankenstein. And then on the bottom, it says monster. Again, a medium. Bland Charnas out of Brooklyn, New York, so they were probably a direct competitor to Ben Cooper. They were out of Brooklyn as well. And this was sold at J.M. Field's company for $1.68. Look how clean that price tag is compared to the rest of the box. The price tag is stark white. $1.68 for a deluxe Frankenstein costume. Yep, I'd pass out too. Now, of course, one of the coolest things about this costume is the mask. It's got this fantastic funhouse-style paint job on it. And it's very reminiscent of the Halco Frankenstein mask. I often wonder if these companies utilize the same molds, because the masks are very similar. And this one here is clearly trying to emulate the Universal Pictures Frankenstein. It has the neck bolts there. It has the flat head. It's got the classic Frankenstein haircut, and then it's got the furrowed brow, of course, but instead, up along the forehead line here, instead of the clamps, they do this sort of white paint job along the hairline to remind us of the clamps, but not quite to copy them. And then I love this sort of greenish paint on the furrowed brow and the green highlights here on the cheeks. But it's also got this flesh tone look to it, which I think is kind of cool. And with the flesh tone paint on it, it reminds me very much of the Frankenstein monster from Frankenstein Conquers the World. So it's very reminiscent of that to me. And that's kind of cool because they never did make a Frankenstein mask of that particular monster. But overall, a really fantastic looking mask here. And of course, you've got this fantastic looking smock to complement the mask. Now you've got your traditional colors of purple and black here, which I always found interesting that they wanted kids to be visible at night and they're making costumes out of purple and black. But I suppose this giant glow-in-the-dark Frankenstein face would help the kid get noticed. And what a face it is. I love this illustration here. It's not exactly trying to copy the Frankenstein monster from Universal Pictures. It's its own thing. It's got this furrowed brow. It's got that great turquoise glow-in-the-dark paint highlights. He's got broken teeth and scars, and he's got these big ears. And of course, what you've got here is a picture of Frankenstein on the outfit that Frankenstein would be wearing. And I'm not quite sure what this outfit is supposed to be. It's like a shoelace-style vest with a jester or clown's collar. Is it Frankenstein wearing a corset? Is this some early interpretation of Frank and Furter? I mean, it is a cool illustration, and I do like the extra details that the artist has added to the picture as well. Like that big hoop earring that the Frankenstein monster is wearing. As if it's some sort of Frankenstein from the old world, or it's a Frankenstein monster from some gypsy caravan. I have to say, kudos to the artist that drew this, the unknown artist that drew this. The world could use more beatniks like yourself. And here is how the mask and the smock look together. They complement each other perfectly. What an amazing piece of mid-60s monster memorabilia. Frankenstein-tastic. So we have the first Ben Cooper Frankenstein costume in '63. And then we have a similar style costume in '64 in the glitter glow format. Now, Ben Cooper would do this quite often. They would even have different style smocks in the same catalog released the same year. And they would repurpose and reuse all this artwork from these smocks, which is why it's kind of hard to definitively pin down what costumes came out when. This one has a 1965 Universal Pictures copyright on it there under Frankenstein's hand. And you can see the board is from the prior Frankenstein design with the Frankenstein name on it on the broken board. But we've got an entirely new Frankenstein monster here. And it's more along the lines of the Glenn Strange monster. It's a little bit more horrific. The other one was kind of cartoonish. It was cool and scary, but it was more of a cartoonish monster. This one is more of a Glenn Strange / Boris Karloff monster. And Frankenstein's got these gnarled hands with sharp red claws, and even some of the fingernails are broken on it, which is kind of terrifying. And he's got bloody scars, and he's got these blood red eyes. And we've got the purple again, but instead of the black, we've got a yellow chest. And we've got those chains around the neck this time as well. Those remain. So they kept the chains, they kept the Frankenstein name, and they kept the board. Now the mask that went with this one was the sort of shovel-faced Frankenstein with the yellow skin, the white forehead, and the big scar. I actually like the style of this one as well too. I mean, again, that purple was consistent throughout the years on a lot of the monster movie costumes. And it's kind of interesting. I like the way the yellow incorporates in with the yellow. It kind of sets off each other well. It almost goes together a bit better than the first costume. The first costume being sort of all black, the white was very stark against it. This blends in a little bit more. And what I just noticed taking a look at the Frankenstein here is the Frankenstein monster they've drawn again is the one with the sort of sheepskin vest that he wore in Son of Frankenstein. But a terrific Classic looking Frankenstein from the height of the Monster Kid craze. Now, we've talked about Halco, Ben Cooper, and Bland Charnas, but we've neglected one of my favorite costume companies, Collegeville. This version shows up in the Collegeville catalog in 1965, fresh on the heels of the 63, 64 Ben Cooper versions of Frankenstein, which we know at this time are huge sellers. And Collegeville refers to this outfit at that time as the Brute. Now, the next year in the 1966 catalog, it shows up as the Monster. And in subsequent years, this costume will continue to show up over and over again. And sometimes, in some catalogs, it shows up twice. Once as the Brute and once as the Monster. And this costume has become iconic in its own way. It's one of the better knockoff versions of Frankenstein. And it's so good that Collegeville carried it for years. And what we've got here is the 66 version, I believe. And it is in the classic Collegeville box, which has the Collegeville flag there. When Collegeville first started out, they made flags and aprons. And they took the scraps from these flags and aprons to fashion clown outfits and jester outfits. And that's how they got into the costume business. Once again, they did this prior to Ben Cooper. It's a little torn on the bottom there. You've got the standard information there. Bright for light, flame retarded, quality costumes, colorful masks, wide vision eye holes. And we're missing some of the cellophane in the front there. And it, like I said, it's kind of torn here on the sides. But overall, it's a nice box. It's nice to have the box. And again, you see right there, it says Collegeville flag and manufacturing company, Collegeville, Pennsylvania. And they're suggesting that this costume can be used for parties, parades, or trick-or-treat. And what I've got here, dear viewers, is what I love so much. That patina. A kid's name is written on the box. And what's even cooler is it was a little girl at the time. Lisa Ann Savage. Savage? Savage? There's no E on the end, so I'm going, or is it Savage? I don't know. But she must have loved Frankenstein and scaring people. So kudos to that girl. And Lisa Ann Savage, if you are out there, please contact me. I'd love to hear about your experiences with this costume. And of course, we've got to look at the bottom of the box. We've got it listed as Monster. It's a medium. And we've got Boscov's. $1.77 it looks like, and it says Collegeville glow in the dark costume. Love that font. I love all this early 50s and 60s stylized art that they would put on these boxes. And as I said, we've got this iconic mask. Now, if you are a Halloween collector, a monster collector, a Frankenstein fan, a costume fan, you have seen this mask before. And clearly this edges very close to infringing upon the copyright of the Frankenstein license. You've got the bolts in the neck. You've got the square forehead. You don't have green skin, but you've got sort of this yellowish greenish skin, which is most likely the glow-in-the-dark paint. And it's kind of cool. He's got this open mouth with a smashed teeth or missing teeth. Fantastic paintwork. And again, here we've got those blue highlights in the black hair. Seems to be something that they liked to do, all the mask companies back then. Now we've got stitches across the forehead, and you've got these, but they're up a little bit higher in the hair, but they're clearly trying to emulate the clamps that hold Frankenstein's skull closed. Great condition. And then we've got, now this is interesting. We've got the glows in the dark when exposed to light. And the name on the inside of the mask is Scott Miller. Now, again, I've said this about everyone, but this is one fantastic looking smock. There's just something so cool about the artwork and the designs that were put onto these outfits. And oftentimes people that remember these costumes or collect these costumes, there's this dividing line between people that hate the fact that the costumes contained artwork of the character on them with the character's name, as opposed to a design that would be more like the character that you would be. So I'm of the school that this is cooler than just having a design of what your character would be. And there's nothing like these illustrations or these graphics on anything anymore.
Why, that's the last costume I took Jody trick-or-treating in before my demise.
Vincent, you died in like the 90s.
I know, but I made Jody wear the same costume year after year. Fool!
Now, here's what Collegeville was all about. You're going to go knock off Frankenstein, go all out. People tend to fawn over Ben Cooper, and Ben Cooper was awesome. I love all the costume companies, and I love everything they released. But Collegeville just has a special place in my heart for some of the things they attempted and tried. So you've got this Frankenstein-style monster. And again, what we're seeing here, this mid-60s Monster Kid stuff, was pretty gory. And I don't know if this was a reaction to the fact that all this type of stuff had been banned from the comic books, because you've got a lot of things going on in the 60s with this monster stuff where they had gory monsters. Could be the fact that Hammer Films had sort of gored up the traditional Gothic monsters. It could be a reaction to the fact that a lot of these things were banned from comic books, as we discussed earlier, due to the Kefauver hearings and the Comics Code. And this was how the monster kids got their gore. Frankenstein, the Wolfman, vampires, devils, demons, they were all banned from comic books. So you're not going to let kids read comic books about monsters. They're going to dress up and be monsters. And this is a fantastic smock. Look at the artwork on that. You've got, again, edging very close to the territory of copyright infringement with the Universal Monster. He's green, but they can probably get away with that, saying it's the glow-in-the-dark paint. He looks a lot like the mask. He doesn't have the bolts on the neck, but he's got the missing teeth there. He's got the wrinkles along the upper lip, the sagging eyes, and he's got those clamps around his head. And then his hands are reaching forward, and clearly there is blood dripping from his fingers. He has crushed somebody's skull or killed someone. And then the word monster is up there. And for some reason, there is this wild pattern of eyes on stalks behind him, like veins and eyeballs all around him. Almost Outer Limits style in a way. It's almost kind of a combination of horror and sci-fi. And I bet all those glow in the dark. Now the costume is all rayon, and it's got the Halloween colors of green, yellow, and orange. And you've got that little orange piping around the neck there, adding to the accents. I'm going to have to say, out of all the costumes we've looked at so far, and I've loved each and every one of them, this one has its own special sort of charm. It really is a cool little costume. And, I mean, leave it to Collegeville to do something like this. Collegeville really doesn't get the credit it deserves. I love Collegeville. I love Collegeville costumes. I'm in love with Collegeville costumes. You heard it here. I said it.
Oh, he says that all the time, doesn't he, Jody? We hear it day in and day out. Collegeville costumes, Collegeville. Why don't you marry Collegeville costumes and let me return to my grave?
Now, when we hit the year of 1966, Ben Cooper is still making their Frankenstein monster costumes, of course. But now they've added a new mask for Frankenstein to the mix. We've still got the traditional shovel-faced Frankenstein, as we'll refer to him. But now we've got this yellow-skinned Glenn Strange Frankenstein that is much closer to the Frankenstein from the Universal Pictures. And in 1966, this mask only seems to appear as a rack mask. I don't see him associated with any costume. The mask associated with the Frankenstein costume still continues to be the white and yellow-faced Frankenstein. And what's interesting in the 66 Ben Cooper catalog that we still see is that Ben Cooper is still putting out and carrying Monstro. Now, I'm not sure when the yellow-faced Glenn Strange Frankenstein is incorporated into the line proper with an actual costume in Ben Cooper, as there's some sort of gaps in the catalogs that I was able to see. But in the 68 catalog, there is a Frankenstein costume that shows up as an illustration with a green Frankenstein face.
You will create others exactly as I am. Then we will show these people of yours the real meaning of fear.
Now, Ben Cooper is ruling the roost with their officially licensed Universal monsters, and Collegeville is keeping up with its knockoff monster. But Halco, our originator of the Frankenstein costume back in 1961, is also creating its knockoff version of the Frankenstein monster, or the monster. And this is a costume that we have here that Halco released in 1969. Now, there were versions of it released prior to 1969. I'm not quite sure when they incorporated this particular costume into the line. There are several versions of this within one line. As a matter of fact, in the 1969 catalog, there are 3 different versions of this costume. Same mask, but 3 different costumes/smocks. And this costume is called Monster Man. Now, what's interesting about this particular costume is this was marketed as being sold in its own trick-or-treat bag. So it didn't come in a box, it came in this bag we see here before us. And this is the actual trick-or-treat bag it came in. It says, use me for a trick-or-treat bag. You can see the mask in there. It's got these great traditional Halloween graphics on it. You've got the pumpkin-headed scarecrow, the owl, bat, kid dressed as a clown, and kids trick-or-treating down there. Again, you just don't see people doing artwork like that anymore. That stylized kind of, I call it like mid-century modern, but I don't know what you actually call it. Heading up to this haunted house. And you've got a devil there, and a kid in a skeleton costume, a witch, princess, trick or treat. Now, this mask is clearly a knockoff, and it is definitely not trying to infringe upon the Frankenstein copyright. This is more of an ogre-style creature. He's got these tusks or fangs protruding from his lower lips. He's got this 5 o'clock shadow here. He's got these dark eyes. Now he's got the furrowed brow, and you can kind of see some of the same paint scheme from the original 61 Frankenstein there that they were using. Again, they're using these sort of monster neon colored paints. And he's got these 2 things up here that I think are supposed to be horns. I'm not sure if they're horns or they're supposed to be some type of electrodes. And if I'm perfectly honest, they kind of look like nipples. And he's got these clamps keeping his head closed and this odd circular scar going down the center of his face. And he's got this unibrow going on. I don't think that anybody ever used this. I wonder if this was old store stock or it was just bought and nobody ever wore it. The costume is pristine. There's no stains, rips, or anything on it. And the artwork on this, of course, is beautiful. You've got this, it's almost like he's more of a giant / ogre / werewolf. He's got that square head like he's trying to be Frankenstein, but he's got those canines popping out of his lower chin. And he looks like he's torn a tree out by its roots. Either that or it's a big branch he's using as a club. Kind of like he's some sort of swamp monster. But really fantastic illustration. I mean, even the veins bulging on his hand that is holding the branch over there. You've got the moon up on the shoulder, and then down below you have that creepy monster font that appears to be dripping blood. Now, this might have been the sort of bargain version, so to speak, because number one, it came in a trick-or-treat bag, and it has no sleeves. But it is still a quality costume. Like I'm saying, it's not vinyl, and it is not cheap rayon. And you can tell by the condition that it's in, from being from 1969, that it's still clean and bright and shiny and not a tear or stain on it. Now, this one here came in the box, but it did not have the mask. And you've got the Halco masquerade costume box here. So this was probably one of the more deluxe costumes. It was sold at Sky City for $2.96. So this is the Monster Man. It came with the same mask. It came with a larger mask of the last one we looked at, the ogre mask. But here you've got something more along the lines of something you'd see Superman fighting in a Fleischer cartoon. And I know you can't see the full illustration. I'll try and get a shot of it, but you've got an entire monster on the whole smock, from the chest all the way down to the legs. And he's breaking these chains. He's chained to his feet. He seems to have legs made of iron, or he's wearing some sort of armored plating. He's got what appears to be metal underwear. Again, he seems to be like a robot or something along those lines. And then he's got this breastplate that says Monster Man, and he's flexing his muscles. And now this one looks much more like Frankenstein than the other one. It's got the flat head, and it's got the electrodes up on the forehead rather than the neck, which was a trick that a lot of people used when they were doing knockoff Frankensteins. But there's a lot of detail being put into this costume and into this creature, the guy that drew it. Chains. He's got some ropes wrapped around him as well, like somebody was trying to lasso him or capture him. He's got a rope wrapped around his waist. He actually has, shake lines up here, like he's shaking his fists. And there's as good a look as we're going to get with it with the mask. So here we have the Glenn Strange yellow-faced Frankenstein, as I like to refer to him, that we discussed, that showed up back in 1966 as a rack mask. This is the first version of it that I've got in my collection, and I'm guesstimating that this is somewhere around 70, 72, possibly 73. Again, they would run with several different Frankensteins at the same year in the same line, with different masks and different smocks. This is in the TV Hero costume box, and we'll take a quick look at it. It looks like Frankenstein is on TV being watched by kids. How appropriate for a character that became so popular from the Shock TV theater package.
Master.
So here we finally get to see that classic Glenn Strange Frankenstein. Ben Cooper style, of course. Now, I actually really like this mask. As a kid, I wasn't hot on it because it was yellow and not green. But the colorings kind of work here. It gives it an eerie appeal. And I'm sure they made it yellow so that it would be more visible at night. They kept that sort of bizarre scar on the forehead there, that bulging scar. It almost looks like one of those fake scars you'd buy at the novelty store. I like the highlights they have under the eyes there. It's definitely got the Glenn Strange mouth, those Glenn Strange lips. You've got the scar on the cheek here. And again, we've got those cool blue highlights in the hair. That wild mane of Frankenstein hair. But overall, that is a really awesome mask. And again, I'm thinking that it may have appeared with a costume earlier than this, but I just haven't seen it in any catalogs that way. It only shows up as a rack mask. And honestly, this mask is probably one of the better Ben Cooper Frankenstein masks. I mean, look at it. It just, if you'll pardon the pun, screams Halloween. And here yet we've got another variation of the Frankenstein smock/costume. And this one is back to the 65 version, but they've taken away the board with Frankenstein's name on it. We've got a more jaundiced, yellowish-looking Frankenstein. It's actually kind of creepy, and it fits right into that period that we're in the 70s now. Kind of reminds me of a Bronze Age Marvel Comics Frankenstein in a way. We're stepping away from the 60s, and now this to me is very 70s Monster Kid. Still got the chains across the neck, and we've still got the purple sleeves and the purple pants, but now we've got an orange chest to make it more Halloween-y. And for some reason, Frankenstein is dressed in this checkerboard pattern. But I have to say, this Frankenstein looks really creepy. He's got these sort of white, milky eyes, these dead eyes. And that yellow just makes it kind of jump right off the orange there. Gives it almost a 3D-like effect. This is the Frankenstein-style costume that I would see hanging from the rafters in Child World or Woolworths when you go in around Halloween time. But that right there is the Frankenstein mask that I remember from my youth. And we've got another random piece that sort of fits into the timeline right around this period, and it is this mask here. I picked this up in a lot of masks a few months ago. I got it because it's Frankenstein, and I wasn't quite sure what it was. But when I was researching this episode, I found out that this belongs to a Flick and Trick Ben Cooper set. Now, Ben Cooper would often add things to costumes to make them more appealing to kids and to market them better. Glitter Glow, Glow in the Dark, Hoot and Toot. Hoot and Toot was a costume that had a hole in the mouth and there was a kazoo in it. And these Flick and Tricks. Now, the Flick and Tricks would have a light in the costume that lit up the mask. You would carry around this little battery pack in your pocket and click it on and off. And what's cool about this is it harkens back to that original monster costume we saw from 1954 from Ben Cooper, with the neck bolt in the middle of the forehead and the light on it. So it's sort of come round again. Ben Cooper took something from 1954 and they're repurposing it in 69-73. Now, the reason I'm placing this at 69-73 is because when you see the smock is a very cool looking smock and a very difficult one to find. It's sort of this psychedelic pattern. It's got Frankenstein's head on it with this checkerboard behind him and this sort of psychedelic spiral pattern. And the sleeves have these sort of tassels hanging down. And as we enter the 70s here, we'll be taking a look at our last Frankenstein piece. This is the Ben Cooper Frankenstein from what I always thought was 1973, but I believe this was actually released in 1975. Now, I showcased this costume last year in my Ben Cooper Universal Monsters episode, but he needs to come back again just to fit into this timeline. This has always been my favorite Ben Cooper monster box. It's got all the classic monsters on it. It's got great graphics and it's got great colors. And the cool thing about this version of Frankenstein is he's finally showing up green. Although we did see that illustration of Frankenstein being green in 68. Now, we've seen this box before, but we'll take a quick look at Frankenstein. It's a large for a change. And the reason I obviously thought it was 73 was because it says 1973 Universal Pictures. What is possible that happened is that whenever they repurposed or changed the costume, they would have to renew the copyright because they're making sort of a different version. So quite possibly they changed the costume up in 73 and renewed the copyright in 73. But I don't see this costume appearing until the 1975 catalog. But what's interesting here, especially after taking a look at some of the other Frankensteins, is I don't think we've seen this mold before. It's not Shovelface, and it's not quite Glenn Strange. And it's not Flick and Trick. So they've used a different mask mold almost here. Kind of a different paint job. It's all green, which is what we traditionally think of as Frankenstein. It's got black neck bolts, which don't exactly look like the Glenn Strange ones from the yellow mask. He's got a bigger nose, seems to have a big nose there. He has the furrowed brow, and he's got the flat head, but now we have no blue highlights in there. And he doesn't have the forehead clamps. He's just got these two little scars there. We're missing the grotesque scar, and we're missing sort of the neon scars that used to go on the cheeks that some of them would have. But still a great mask, still very monsterific, and it fits right in with our 70s theme here. It definitely seems very 70s to me. And now that we're in the 70s, Ben Cooper is adding vinyl to the costume. We've got a vinyl chest plate, we've got no sleeves, and we've got the rayon pants. And this one obviously is a combination of the character's outfit with the character on it. You've got the jacket there with the buttons apparently are bolts, and he's wearing this sort of He's wearing this pinstriped shirt, and then this glowing Frankenstein face is coming out of the front of him. And it's cool because the Frankenstein face is along the lines of the mask, but it's got the yellow skin here, and it seems to be a bit more Glenn Strangey on the picture. I do enjoy that illustration of Frankenstein. It's quite eerie and very effective. Now, these are the ones that I remember seeing when I was a kid, and it was the blue box Wolfman that I had and loved. Now, as we move into the 1980s, Ben Cooper will lose the Universal license to Collegeville. And as you can see here in the 1981 Collegeville catalog, Collegeville finally gets to make a Frankenstein monster of its own. And this one actually has Boris Karloff's likeness on it. I believe this is the first time that we ever see Boris Karloff on a boxed costume. Now, not to be outdone, of course, Ben Cooper continues to make a character called the Monster, which is just them repurposing and reusing their prior Frankenstein costumes. As we move into the 90s, Ben Cooper and Collegeville will both get absorbed by Ruby's costumes, and there will be future Frankenstein costumes. But none of them will ever have the special charm that these boxed costumes from the 60s and 70s had. So that's going to bring us to the end of another episode of Dr. Durant's Sanctum. I hope you enjoyed taking this journey with me, looking at these cool vintage Frankenstein costumes. And please make sure to check out the other Bleak Sunday participants. Just click on that Bleak Sunday hashtag in the comments, and it will take you right to the playlist. There's plenty of cool content to get you all in the Halloween mood. And if you enjoyed this episode, please hit that like and subscribe button. You never know what terrifying content I'll be cooking up next in the Sanctum. And please leave me a comment below. I'd appreciate any information you have to fill in some of these timelines here. Let me know what some of your favorite Frankenstein costumes were. Do you own any of the Halco Universal monsters? And if so, would you be willing to sell them to me? And as I say every Halloween, may you all have 100 Halloweens more, and enjoy choosing who you chose to be. I'm sure you picked just the right box. Walk in beauty, my friends.
In the end, he sucked the freezing, salty waters inward, and peace at last was his.